Welcome to this explainer by Kong Su's History. Look, we're not here to just memorize dates. We're here to look at the massive systemic forces that actually shape our world. We ask what we know, how we know it, and, well, what it all means. So let's jump right in, because today we're doing a full intellectual autopsy of a single chaotic moment that literally rewired human civilization.
Picture this. It's July of 751 AD, right in the deep heart of Central Asia. A massive Tang Chinese army is being almost entirely wiped out on the banks of the Talas River. The Tang commander is running for his life, but his escape route is completely blocked. And it's not blocked by the enemy, it's jammed with his own panicked pack animals and his fleeing allies. It is a scene of absolute claustrophobic slaughter.
To get his commander out alive, General Li Xie had to grab a heavy wooden club and literally beat his own allied troops to death. He's swinging at men, at horses, everything, just to smash open a bloody escape route. It was a catastrophic collapse. But to understand how the greatest empire in the East ended up in this fatal bottleneck, we really have to pull back and look at the systemic machinery that put them there in the first place.
Which brings us to Section 1, a gamble on the frontier.
Now, the man running for his life during that collapse was Gao Shanzi. He was the military governor of the Oxy Protectorate, commanding Tang China's entire military presence in Central Asia. But here's the interesting part. He wasn't ethnically Han Chinese. He was actually from a Goguryeo military family from the Korean Peninsula. The Tang Empire relied heavily on this meritocratic system of fierce, non-Han generals like him to manage a loose network of vassal states through sheer military intimidation. Meanwhile, coming from the complete opposite direction, the newly formed Abbasid Caliphate was aggressively pushing east. Under a battle-hardened power broker named Abu Muslim, they were actively integrating new territories. So you have two massive, totally different expansionist models on an absolute collision course.
And Gao Xianzhi, he was an absolutely brilliant commander. Back in 747 AD, he led his troops over the treacherous Pamir Mountains and just utterly crushed Tibetan influence in the region. Those hard-won victories pushed the Tibetans out of the corridor, secured Tang dominance over dozens of Central Asian city-states, and earned him supreme command. At this point, he was the undisputed master of the West.
Let's dive into Section 2, the clash of two empires.
With two apex empires expanding into the exact same Central Asian space, a collision was basically inevitable. It was just a matter of who was going to light the match. And, as it turns out, it started with a single, brutal decision by Gao Xianzhi himself. He used a standard Tang tactic of extreme intimidation against a city-state called Chach, which is roughly modern Tashkent. Under the pretext that they had failed in their vassal etiquette, he sacked the city, but crucially, he went a step too far. He executed the king of Chach, a man who had already peacefully surrendered to him.
The really critical point here is that the executed king's son managed to escape. And he didn't run to the Tang court to ask for justice. No, he ran straight west to the Abbasids to ask Abu Muslim for an army. This localized act of brutality handed the Abbasids the absolute perfect moral pretext to march their forces east, which should have been a minor border dispute instantly exploded into a massive imperial showdown.
And that sets the stage for Section 3, 5 days at Talas.
This brings us back to July 751. 30,000 Tang-led troops marched out to meet the Abbasid army at Talas. And what followed wasn't just some quick skirmish, it was a brutal, grinding 5-day stalemate between two completely different philosophies of war. The Abbasids were sending waves of light cavalry and mounted archers trying to probe the Tang lines. But the Tang corps? They were heavy infantry advancing like a wall. They used these dense, devastating crossbow volleys backed by soldiers wielding massive two-handed Mado polearms that were specifically designed to slice down charging cavalry. For 5 straight days, the Abbasids simply could not break that Tang wall.
But then, on the 5th day, the entire architecture of the Tang alliance just collapsed. The Karluk mercenaries, who were stationed specifically to protect the Tang flanks, abruptly switched sides. They turned around and smashed right into Gao Xianzhi's army from the rear. Caught in a devastating vice between the Abbasid heavy front and the betraying Karluks behind them, that impenetrable Tang formation shattered completely.
This single event built into a rapid systemic collapse. The rout at Talas didn't just cost lives, it permanently crippled Tang military prestige in Central Asia. And just 4 years later, the catastrophic An Lushan rebellion erupted inside China, forcing the empire to recall all its frontier troops just to survive. The Tang Empire would literally never return to the West.
And what happened to Gao Xianzhi?
Well, he survived the bloody retreat at Talas, but his story ends in complete tragedy. In 756 AD, while defending against the An Lushan rebels, he was falsely accused of corruption by a supervising eunuch and executed by his own side. A brilliant meritocratic commander who once shook the western regions was ultimately devoured by the very empire he spent his whole life expanding. And as Wang Gungwu's brilliant historical analysis points out, the Battle of Talas accidentally established the permanent geographical boundary between Islamic and Chinese civilizations in Central Asia. The line drawn in the blood of that route, that is essentially the border we still see today.
Which takes us to Section 4, the prisoners who made paper.
Now, the most profound legacy of this battle wasn't drawn on a map. It really wasn't about who won the land. It was carried in the bleeding hands of the captured soldiers marched west, never to return. We actually know this because of Du Huan, a Tang civil official who was captured in the rout. He survived an astonishing 11 years in captivity across the Abbasid world. When he finally made it back to China, he wrote an eyewitness account confirming that highly skilled Chinese craftsmen, weavers, painters, artisans were absorbed directly into the Abbasid world as prisoners of war. And among those prisoners were papermakers. Just look at this incredible, unintended journey. Captured craftsmen were taken to Samarkand, where they adapted their traditional mulberry bark techniques to use local flax instead. This cheap, durable paper fueled the famous Abbasid House of Wisdom. From there, paper mills spread across North Africa and straight into Europe. By 1450, when Gutenberg invented the printing press, the cheap paper required to make it actually work was only there because of this exact chain of events. This single, involuntary technology transfer accidentally rewired global history.
This brings us to our final parts, Section 5, the true cost of progress. We really have to look at this historical pivot with objective, cold clarity. It's incredibly easy to look back at the spread of papermaking and romanticize it as this beautiful, willing cultural exchange between East and West, but in this explainer we hold to a core tenet. Comment is free, but the facts are sacred. And as the facts dictate, this monumental civilizational leap began not as a diplomatic gift, but as involuntary forced labor extracted from captive men, stripped of their freedom, who would never see their families again.
So a civilizational achievement celebrated by all of history was quite literally born from the tragedy, captivity, and forced labor of ordinary, forgotten people. And acknowledging this brutal reality, it doesn't shrink the historical significance of paper's journey westward at all. It simply gives the story the human weight, the actual cost that it carries.
We often say that culture has no high or low, but civilization has superior and inferior metrics of human well-being. History, however, operates totally outside of human morality. It acts as this unpredictable, often cruel machine, scattering the seeds of progress through the devastating machinery of war and suffering.
Just think about the immense scale of this for a second. A single sheet of paper, conceptually set out from a prisoner of war column in 751 AD. Nobody planned its route. Nobody signed a free trade agreement to hand this technology over. It was carried forward by nameless captives taking one involuntary step at a time. Until 1,000 years later, it ended up in the hands of anyone who has ever opened a book. Which really leads us to a profound realization. Whether a core technology crosses a border is rarely decided by the nation that invents it. It is decided by the chaotic, unstoppable forces of history. So we have to ask ourselves, as we look at the rapid spread of technology, artificial intelligence, and data today, who really controls the borders of human knowledge? Because, as we've seen, the spread of knowledge is rarely clean, and it's almost never free of a human toll. In this long river of history, what we're looking for is the fragile baseline leading toward freedom. Thank you so much for joining this Kongsu's History Explainer. Until next time, keep looking at the forces beneath the surface.